Joining me now from Atlanta, Georgia, Executive Director of the National Diversity Council for Trump 2020 and small business owner Bruce LeVell. Bruce, great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Bruce, predictably, the Democrats are up in arms. They want President Trump to wait until after the election, conveniently, although they had different views back in 2016. And now we see some of the top contenders, if you will, who are under fire by the media and by Democrats, which would be the 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals Judge Amy Coney Barrett. They seem to take issue with the fact of the idea that she's pro-life and her Christian faith.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And the president has set records on putting really good judges since he's become president. And really, Stephanie, he put a compilation of a great list back in 2016. And you heard him say, well, where's Joe Biden's list? The other thing, too, is the fact that, listen, America has been dealing with decades. You saw Senator Mitt Romney, that he plans to go with the president for decades, that the courts have had very liberal-leaning judges, as well as cities. You see our chaotic cities that we're having under liberal leadership, Democrat leadership, which is all the chaos and destruction and looting. So I think really the American people, even some that's in the middle or on the left, are saying, maybe we need to look at this a little better. I predict a really strong fight, but I think at the end of the day, they might not want to admit it. But it's like, well, the president has a great record for 3 years and it has worked. So maybe we need to look at his nominee.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were some reports that President Trump had met with Judge Barrett. And as I pointed out, there's been kind of like a pile-on against her. And just in general, like religion shouldn't enter this nomination process. And we saw this the first time around, which is pretty disgusting. And now some of the media are saying that she would be bad for women. Nominating a woman judge would be bad for women.
Well, I don't know where that's going, but I tell you, as a business owner here in Atlanta and a Black conservative, since I was age 18 working for Reagan stuffing envelopes, I have to say that I'm more interested in the best qualified, the best candidate, the best person who's going to put the best interests of the nation as it relates to articulating and understanding what the Constitution says. And like I said before, they've had it for decades, and you see where we're at, the state of our country and the state of what's happening in our cities. So I think it's gonna go a little bumpy, but I think we're gonna get her confirmed or whoever, and we'll know Saturday who that might be.
Yeah, and I'm not for identity politics, but I think the person who's most qualified for the job deserves it. That being said, President Trump has committed to nominating a woman, and we'll see about that. But he pointed out the abuse this person might have to face, and we saw that the first time around with Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and how the Democrats treated him and how the media attacked him and they slandered him, and they were dragging him and his family through the mud, and they continue to do that, actually.
Yeah. And, this is the lesson learned, Stephanie. I always said one great thing about the president and his campaign was not being tied to special interests, lobbying, and pay-to-play people. Unfortunately, the Pelosi's, the Schumers, and all the folks who've been, with a compilation over 100 years in Senate and Congress, Stephanie, those are the folks that are tied to those special interest groups and other pay-to-play people who are the puppet masters on their votes. So this is another great awakening for the American people right here on your show. Pay attention to who you're electing in your state court, your superior court, your district attorneys. You saw what Soros has been doing in terms of funding district attorneys, trying to get hold of our great republic and our court systems. So all the American people, pay attention to the local races, all your judges, superior court, et cetera, and your congressional offices, everything across the board, and make sure that there's no pay-to-play or special interest tied to their campaign coffer.
Yeah, and I'm sure you heard of this, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi talking about the arrows she has in her quiver, and the Democrats, how there's the possibility of impeaching President Trump again, or trying to, and also AG Barr. I mean, they'll never stop. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to play well with voters, because when they tried that the first time, that didn't go so well for them.
No, the American people are anxious to get out of this pandemic. You see the vaccines are around the corner. You see a lot of states have done a great job with, quote, our Republican governors and mayors who've done very well combating COVID. But, the American people are anxious to get back open in their economy. Number one economy in the world, Stephanie. Number one oil producer. Lowest unemployment in the history of the United States. Lowest Black unemployment in the nation's history, recorded in '72. They remember that. They're anxious to get back. they, listen, they don't have to like the president, but they can't take away his great accomplishments. So Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, the numbers speak for themselves. They're anxious to get back to our economy.
So I saw this article, which kind of made me laugh out loud. It was from Politico, and it's Joe Biden's pitching himself to voters as the union man who respects the dignity of work and will defend organized labor if he wins the White House. But to rank and file members in some unions, especially building trades, it doesn't matter. They're still firmly behind President Trump. So Biden, he doesn't really know a lot about running a business.
Right.
He's been in government since before I was born. So it's just hard to, to believe that he's the man of the people and understands the working class.
Yeah, well, you saw he was behind NAFTA, and you saw what NAFTA did to especially some of our great cities in Ohio and Pennsylvania and across the nation. That was a job killing, effort what he implemented with NAFTA. And thank God the president came in and renegotiated that deal to put the chant back in "Made in America, Buy America." And encouraging American citizens to build your product here in America. And you saw how vulnerable we were with our pharmaceuticals as well as our prophylactics in other foreign nations that we were dependent on their manufacturing. So this is a great lesson for all of us. And thank God the president did run on that platform of putting it back in America. But Joe is pretty much clueless. You're right, Stephanie. He's never ran a balance sheet. He doesn't know what a P&L sheet like I do and most 30.6 million small businesses across the country who foot the bill, Stephanie, which we make up 60% of the GDP. We know what works. We send that quarterly payroll tax in that they argue so graciously sometimes about where our money's going to go. Joe doesn't have a clue about that. The president understands a balance sheet. He understands a profit and loss statement. And that's why we've been, quote, profitable under his administration.
Yeah, and Biden had his time in the White House for 8 years.
Yeah.
Serving with Obama. And so if he was going to make such a big difference for the economy and creating jobs, I believe they would have done that at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What did you think about some of the recent polls? Obviously, Trump supporters are a little bit skeptical about the polls because we learned a lot from 2016. A lot of people don't want to admit that they're supporting President Trump just because they fear retaliation from their friends, their work, and this and that. But some of these polls are pretty interesting. We see that Trump is edging out Biden in some of the battleground states like Florida. We see he's doing well in Arizona. And it's also among Hispanics. President Trump is doing surprisingly well with Hispanics.
Yeah. Well, in 16, he got 28% of the Hispanic vote and 9% of black vote. But I'll tell you, I've said this many times, you see the surging polls on black men supporting the president. And I know we'll be up in the high teens or the 20% with black votes is going into 2020. But it's an interesting argument because it's kind of like deja vu from 16 on what polling were, how Hillary was ahead 1 or 2, whatever, when the reality came on the election night. So, respectfully, a lot of folks, unfortunately, under the cancel culture, especially a black conservative that supports the president and many millions of folks who look like me, et cetera, that are worried that they don't really give up their information over the phone on quote accurate polling because of the cancel culture, Stephanie. So I think the polling is not a traditional playbook that you would see historically in other elections. This is a once again a candidate or a president that we have for a reelection that is not part of the traditional playbook, and I think people need to go back and remember that's who he is. So I think a lot of the polls are kind of little all over the place that people aren't really giving up their real truth or telling where they were going to go with this.
Yeah, we didn't have a chance to talk about this, but when Biden was down in Florida and he showed up at one of the Hispanic Heritage events and he plays Despacito on his cell phone to a room full of Hispanics, as if that's going to help him.
Well,
it was pretty bad.
Well, at least he didn't grab a hot sauce bottle out of his book bag like Hillary tried to pander to the African American vote. But listen, it gets back to what I'm saying. I have this great hashtag, Stephanie, it's called hashtag DNC elder abuse. I think respectfully that they realize they've gone this far and they have a failed candidate. They can't go anywhere. He's gaffe after gaffe. He said 200 million people were going to die when we only have 320 million people in the United States. It's gaffe after gaffe after gaffe. And they realize that something's not right with Joe Biden. And I think, respectfully, I said this, that I really think they think this election really is the loss and a wash, but won't admit it. And stay tuned. You haven't seen anything on terms of gaffes and the other things that's going to come out of Joe Biden's mouth that's going to be like scratching your head like, did he just say that?
Yeah,
So
and
stay tuned.
what you're talking about, I did a final thought on that the other day, and you know, public speaking can be difficult, and
Yeah.
we don't expect people to be perfect all the time, but it's obvious that there's something wrong, and he's not all there. He's not the Biden from 10, 15, 20 years ago. He's just not as sharp as he used to be, and that's why they tried to keep him in the basement. That wasn't really working for him, but also him being out in public and speaking isn't helping too. And as you pointed out, the scaff of 200 million people that are going to die from coronavirus when we have a population of around 320, 330 million people, he didn't correct himself. And he's done it before too when he was talking about gun violence, if you will. He was saying over 150 million people affected by gun violence. So it's like he continues to do this over and over again. So it's definitely something that people are keeping an eye on, and we'll see how that all plays out. Well, we're totally out of time. We're going to have to leave it here. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Stephanie.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.